Today, we're diving into a fascinating evolutionary detective story. It's all about the surprising connection between how big our brains are and, well, how many friends we have. As you're about to see, one of those things pretty much dictates the other.
So, let me just start by asking you a question. Think about everybody you know, your friends, your family, the people you work with. Have you ever just felt full, like you've hit a social limit and just can't keep track of one more person? Well, what if that feeling wasn't about being busy, but was actually a hard limit built right into the architecture of your brain?
Okay, so here's where the puzzle starts. It's a really simple observation. Primates, and that includes us, apes, monkeys, the whole family, we have ridiculously large brains for our body size. I mean, it's a huge outlier in the animal kingdom. And a big brain is incredibly expensive to run. It burns a ton of energy. So there has to be a really, really good reason for it.
And that gets us to the core mystery that a biologist named Robin Dunbar set out to solve. Why the giant brain? What was the evolutionary pressure that was so intense it forced the growth of this super costly organ?
So, to crack this case, Dunbar had two main suspects in the lineup. Suspect number one is the ecological brain hypothesis. The idea here is that our brains got bigger to solve problems in the physical world. Stuff like remembering where all the fruit trees are, making mental maps of huge territories, or figuring out clever ways to get hard-to-reach food. Then you've got suspect number two, the social brain hypothesis. This theory says the real challenge wasn't the jungle, it was the other primates, that big brains evolved to handle the crazy complexity of social life, keeping track of who's friends with who owes who a favor, basically navigating all the group politics.
Now, to figure out which of these suspects was the real culprit, Dunbar knew he couldn't just look at the whole brain. That's too general. He had to narrow the investigation and focus on the one part of the brain that grew the most, the part that really changed during primate evolution. And that specific part is called the neocortex. You can think of it as the brain's main CPU. It's that wrinkly outer layer that does all the heavy lifting, all the conscious thought, the problem solving. It's what really makes a primate brain different, and it's the source of pretty much all our cognitive horsepower.
So we've got our key piece of evidence, the neocortex. Now the interrogation can begin. First up to the stand, we're putting the ecological brain theory to the test. If it's the right answer, we should see a really clear link between how big a primate's neocortex is and the kinds of environmental problems it faces.
So, first question, is it all about food? The theory is that finding fruit, which is scattered all over the place and only ripe at certain times, takes a lot more brain power than just sitting around eating leaves. So, do the primates who eat more fruit have a bigger neocortex? Dunbar ran the analysis, and the answer was a loud, clear nope. When you actually plot neocortex size against how much fruit a primate eats, there's just no relationship at all. So that's strike one for the ecological brain. Our brains didn't get huge just to find more bananas. Okay, so if it's not the food, what about that mental map idea? Maybe a bigger neocortex is for navigating a bigger home territory. I mean, that sounds plausible, right? More space means more stuff to remember. Let's see what the data says.
This one's a little sneaky, because at first glance, it looks like there's a connection, but it's actually a total red herring. The only real reason for the connection is that bigger animals tend to have bigger brains and bigger home ranges. Once Dunbar statistically took body size out of the equation, that relationship between neocortex and territory size completely vanished. So, strike two.
The evidence is really starting to pile up, and it is not looking good for our first suspect. The data just doesn't back up the idea that our brains grew bigger mainly to deal with ecological puzzles. The alibi is falling apart.
And this is where the investigation takes a fantastic turn. If the evolutionary driver wasn't about finding food or navigating the physical world, what on earth could it be? We only have one suspect left. And the answer is right here. In Dunbar's own words from his massive 1992 paper, he discovered that there was one and only one variable that lined up perfectly with the size of the neocortex. It wasn't diet, it wasn't home range, it was the average size of that primate's social group.
And just look at the data. It makes it so clear. It's undeniable. The connection between neocortex size and those ecological factors, it's basically zero. But the connection with social group size, it's just off the charts. It's an incredibly strong signal.
This number you see right here, this is the smoking gun. In statistics, it's called an R-squared value, and it tells you how much of one thing can be explained by another. And trust me, an R-squared this high is almost unheard of in biology. What it means is that over 76% of the difference in a primate species group size can be predicted just by knowing the size of its neocortex. It is a direct, powerful, and absolutely undeniable link.
So the case is closed. The evidence is just overwhelming. The social brain hypothesis isn't just a good idea, it's the only one that actually fits the data. The main reason we have these massive brains is to manage our incredibly complex social lives.
And that brings us to the formal definition. The social brain hypothesis is the theory that the main evolutionary pressure that's selected for big brains in primates was the sheer computational power required to live in large and complex social groups. It's all about having the processing power to handle that web of relationships. Now, the implication of this is just profound. It means our social world isn't infinite. It actually has a cap, a ceiling that's not imposed by our schedule or our energy levels, but by our own neurology. The processing power of your neocortex sets a very real physical limit on how many stable relationships you can actually maintain.
So to boil it all down, our incredible intelligence didn't evolve at its core for making tools or mapping the stars. It evolved for a social purpose. Evolution's biggest cognitive challenge wasn't outsmarting the environment. It was understanding, predicting, and navigating the minds of the other people in our group.
And that brings this whole evolutionary story right back to you, right now. Your neocortex has a finite capacity for social connection, so the real question is a personal one. Given that biological limit, who are the people that you're choosing to invest your most precious cognitive resource in? Who's in your group?